To our video about trench warfare. The trenches stretched from Switzerland all the way to the North Sea. They were about 10 feet deep and provided protection for many soldiers. In our video, we'll be discussing the environmental, physical, and mental aspects of trench warfare. So, hope you enjoy it.
So, what are we looking at here?
So this is a recreation of a World War I trench. As you can tell, the water goes up to about your knees. This constant water leads to trench foot, which ultimately could lead to an amputation.
Now that we've seen what these trenches look like, how did these poor environmental conditions affect the soldiers?
Well, as you can see, there's a lot of mud. And because there was so much mud, the artillery strikes would actually bury soldiers, dead and alive, under all this mud. Some soldiers, most of the dead would be under feet of mud and would actually really help in our cause. But other than that, the ones that were alive would have to really scramble their way out of that mud.
Tell me about the gas.
Alright, so to quote a soldier, "Inside the gas mask my head booms and roars. It is nigh bursting. My lungs are tight, they breathe always the same hot, used up air. And the veins on my temple are swollen. I feel as if I'm suffocating." So the actual process of putting on the gas mask and keeping it on was pretty horrible, but also very necessary.
So Parker, tell me about the smell.
Yeah, so the smell was a combination of human waste, gas, and human bodies. So, the smell was extremely hard for a lot of the new people coming in. Veteran soldiers dealt with it pretty easily, and the smell of gas would stay 2 or 3 days after, and it really became the new norm here in the trenches. All right, over here we have Corey. Corey's been dead for about a week or two. He's pretty smelly, It's a shame the mud hasn't covered him up because he is smelly. You hear that, Corey? This isn't rare, Bodies are all throughout this trench. So it's a burden us soldiers have to deal with.
Were soldiers well fed? Unfortunately, most soldiers were not well fed. Oftentimes, soldiers were given meals once a day and were tasked with dividing accordingly. Moreover, conditions in the trenches led to large populations of rats. One soldier stated, "We must look out for our bread. The rats have been much more numerous lately because the trenches are no longer in good condition. The rats are particularly repulsive. They are so fat, with long and nude tails. They seem to be mighty hungry, and almost every man has had their bread gnawed." Rats nibbling on food was a constant threat to soldiers, and was a huge problem during World War I. These rats often carried diseases, which spread rapidly throughout the trenches. Physically, soldiers were pushed to their limits and were doing so on empty stomachs.
What types of diseases were common?
Disease was very common in World War I. Some examples are influenza, typhoid, trench foot, trench fever, malaria, and diabetes. These diseases were often from the numerous rats which populated the trenches, or from the unsanitary conditions. Dead bodies lay in bunches, and oftentimes soldiers were not able to leave the trenches to use the bathroom. One of the most common diseases was trench foot. Trench foot occurred from standing water in the soldiers' boots. Oftentimes, a bad case of trench foot would result in amputation. An estimate from the Great War puts a number of trench foot casualties at 20,000. Disease was a constant threat to soldiers, and many were affected.
All right, boys, mandatory trench foot check. All right, soldier, you're good. Ooh, soldier, you gotta follow me.
Why?
Looks like you got trench foot.
Oh God! Oh no!
How stressed were the soldiers in the trenches in World War I?
The soldiers in World War I were extremely stressed out, to say the least. One soldier, Captain John M. Tribble, described his feelings after a horrible day of mortar and artillery strikes and wrote in his diary, "I'm about all in as my nerves are shot to pieces." Essentially, the constant pressure and fear that the soldiers faced every single day caused a lot of pent-up stress.
How did the soldiers cope with this pent-up stress?
To cope with the stress, many soldiers would either focus on short-term victories or extremely long-term goals. Some examples of a short-term victory would be sleeping in a bed for the first time in 2 months, or, as Corporal Eugene Kennedy wrote after a hard day of work, getting a loaf of bread from a Negro in a boxcar. Another example of a long-term victory would be writing to wife and family back home. One soldier, Captain John M. Tribble, wrote in his diary, This is our 6th anniversary. May the next be spent with her whom I love. Ultimately, the soldiers were searching for anything that would boost their morals in either a short period of time or a long period of time. To them, a half a loaf of bread was a great victory, and also, thinking about loved ones back home would keep them motivated.
What did the soldiers do in their free time?
The soldiers had very little to do besides work. There were often large periods of unfilled time that would haunt the soldiers because they had so little to do to occupy their time. Some soldiers would occupy their time by reading or writing letters to loved ones, but often there was nothing much else to do. This boredom would be very bad for morale because the soldiers would be extremely unmotivated and depressed. Day by day, the soldiers would follow the same routines and it would be detrimental to their mental health. Sergeant Elmer F. Straub of the 42nd Rainbow Division wrote in his diary that, "This life is certainly one hell, and I surely hope that something very unusual happens to break the spell of mud, rain, work, monotony, and dissatisfaction we are under." Every day was the exact same and there was little variation. This allowed for the stress and tension to build up to extreme levels in the soldiers. Boredom was a key factor that caused a lot of depression within the soldiers.
What is the morning hate?
Well, the morning hate was a period after the morning activities, which was about 15 minutes of just relentless artillery strikes and gunfire that would relieve the tension from the early hours of the day. This morning hate resulted from the overwhelming stress and tension that the soldiers faced. In their eyes, an absurd amount of gunfire and artillery strikes was one solution to releasing all of their pent-up energy. This built-up tension can also cause the soldiers to feel a strong sense of paranoia. For example, some soldiers in the trench would be constantly thinking about hypothetical scenarios where someone would jump in their trench and attack them, and the soldier would constantly be thinking about how to react if this example happened in real life. Danger was always hanging over these soldiers' heads, and it caused some serious built-up tension that was only detrimental to the soldiers' mental health. These men also had to live with the dead bodies of other soldiers scattered or piled up around them. This was a constant reminder of the threat that the soldiers faced each day, and ultimately it was very detrimental to their mental health.
Dude, I am so bored.
Same, dude. I'm smoking like 4 packs of cigs a day.
Dude, 4? I'm smoking like 8. It's like I'm just so stressed out.
Dang, that's boss, dude.
Yeah, dude, it's anything to cope with the stress. Like,
For real.
there's dead people everywhere.
I've seen like 4 of my friends just dead, just like soaked in mud.
Yeah, dude, and we just have to sit here thinking about it all day, doing nothing.
It's pretty messed up.
Yeah, like I wrote a letter to my wife, but you know that took like 15 minutes. Now I just have to sit here thinking about it all day.
It's super sad. Can't wait to get out of this place.
Yeah, for sure. This is a hellhole.
In total, trench warfare had a profound effect on soldiers' lives and had a very large influence on the outcome of the war.